Focus to what's been going on between India and China for the better part of the last 3 years or so. The freeze between India and China, the line of actual control, is unlikely to thaw anytime soon. As part of its latest attempt to try and lay claim on Indian territory, China released a list of new names for 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh. The list of names released by China included 5 mountain peaks, 2 land areas, 2 residential areas, and 2 rivers. This even included a town close to Itanagar, the capital of Arunachal Pradesh. China already refers to Arunachal Pradesh, the entire province, as Zhangnan, the southern part of Tibet. India, meanwhile, has rejected China's renaming bid. In fact, the Ministry of External Affairs has put out a very strongly worded statement today saying that this is not the first time that China has made such an attempt. We reject this outright. Arunachal Pradesh is, has been, and will always be an integral and inalienable part of India. Attempts to assign invented names will not alter this reality. And as the Ministry of External Affairs said, this is not the first time that China has tried to, and that to unilaterally, rename places in Arunachal Pradesh. This is the third attempt in 6 years. In April of 2017, China released the first list of new names of 6 places in Arunachal Pradesh. This was done immediately after a visit of the Dalai Lama. Then in December of 2021, China released what it called standardized names of 15 places. These were marked in Chinese maps as Zhangnan or southern Tibet. And now comes the third time, renaming 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh, including a town very close to the capital, Itanagar. Over the last year or so, China has made a huge hue and cry whenever the Prime Minister, the central government's ministers, or even vice presidents and presidents try to visit Arunachal Pradesh. How can India counter these moves of the dragon? A, by boosting infrastructure along the line of actual control. That's an effort to try and keep China's growing influence in check. India is also part of the Quad group of countries that includes the United States, Japan, and Australia. It's got a sharp focus on the Indo-Pacific. China calls this an Asian NATO. India has also banned more than 250 Chinese apps amid security concerns. And in a conversation with me last week at the Rising India Summit, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said that the situation at the line of actual control is still very much dangerous. So tell me, since you mentioned China, where are we on this, the border confrontation that happened? I mean, I believe out of the 7 odd points, 5 there has been disengagement, 2 there is still no disengagement. Just a broad understanding that, do you believe this has gone beyond the remit of army commanders? This has to be a political sort of dialogue and eventually moving to resolve the situation?
Look, first you have to understand what is the nature of the problem. The nature of the problem is that 2 militaries who generally were not 24/7 deployed at or on or very close to the LAC have done so to a great degree after May of 2020. Because pre-May of 2020, both militaries were primarily located in the depth areas where they had permanent bases, and then they would patrol out into the LAC. Now, in 2020, the Chinese breached that in violation of the 93-96 agreements, brought forces to the LAC. Obviously, we countered it. They stayed there, we stayed there. So as a result, you have a very, very intricate situation of very multiple close-up deployments, which by common sense sort of military assessment is a very dangerous situation to be.
All right, so how does India respond to this? Let me bring in our experts on the panel tonight. From the Indian point of view, Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, joining us. And for the Chinese point of view, Andrew K.P. Liang is an independent China strategist from Hong Kong. Let me start with you, Ambassador Sibal. So this is the third time China is doing this renaming business of places in Arunachal Pradesh. How should India respond? Because India is not coveting Chinese territory, so there's no point trying to rename Chinese places, give them Indian names. So how does then India counter this?
You see, we have made our position very clear with regard to the future trajectory of India-China relations. We've been saying that the trust has been completely violated because of the violations of Chinese troops on the LAC. So unless the situation becomes normal, we don't see a normalization of India-China ties. So China has to then consider whether its repeated provocations by giving Chinese names to places and territories in Arunachal Pradesh helps to rebuild ties and helps in the normalization of relations between the two countries. Clearly, they feel that they can keep on doing this without it affecting basically what they think should be India's position in terms of responding to China's provocations, because we have absorbed these provocations. We have asserted that it is our territory and which will remain an inalienable part of our territory. And we've said this again after they renamed 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh, giving them Chinese or Tibetan names. Now, what they're trying to do is to create internally a legal basis for sovereign claims over these territories. So while they cannot change the position on the ground unless they want a full-scale war with India, there's no way they can change the ground situation. But this is a dangerous course of action on their part and may actually then, to respond to your question, at some stage, push us into taking decisions which they won't like and which then can spiral into something much bigger in terms of differences and potential conflict. For example, their position on Arunachal Pradesh is based on what I think is a military occupation of Tibet. It is very disputed whether Tibet belongs to China. It's a different matter than in 1954 we accepted this. We had freshly gained our independence. China and India had very strong ties. We thought the two Asian countries could work together, at least to control the future of Asia outside the traditional Western powers. But China obviously had other plans. But having accepted that at that time doesn't mean that this position is immutable.
Yeah.
And we can begin. And I suggest one of the two things we should do immediately is never in our official communications refer to the Sino-Indian border. We must always refer to the Indo-Tibetan border.
Okay.
And secondly, when we draw our maps of this part of the world, we should show Greater Tibet in dashed lines as part of China. This doesn't change the basic position of having accepted Tibet as part of China, but it would also add a nuance that there is something like Greater Tibet, and there is a Tibet region which is not reconciled to overlordship and military occupation of China.
So,
if they push us in this direction, then obviously the relations will become even sour. But they're willing to take this risk, clearly, because there is no provocation at all
from the Indian side. So let me ask Andrew K.P. Liang, it's one thing to say, okay, there are misperceptions or different perceptions when it comes to a line on the border. There are at different points, I think about 60-odd points on the 3,500-kilometer long LAC, there are these different perceptions. But here what China is doing is to try and lay claim to an entire province. The state of Arunachal Pradesh is a huge land mass. It's like India saying all of Yunnan belongs to India or all of Henan belongs to India. I mean, you can't claim an entire province. That is ridiculous. You have to unmute, Mr. Liang. Okay, we still can't hear you. You have to unmute your computer. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, we still can't hear him. We'll try and see if we can fix that. Andrew K.P. Liang's line from Hong Kong. But all right, now I'm told that your audio is back. Yes, Mr. Liang.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
I think that you have got to look at these long-standing territorial disputes in a proper historic perspective, because these disputes have been lasting for a very, very long time and souring the relationships between these two great countries. You've got to date back these disputes well before the independence of India as a nation, because the territories under British India there have been changed by the British. And China never recognized these change so-called line of demarcation. So that's the origin of it. Secondly, renaming doesn't change anything at all. I mean, you can rename anything you like on either side. So I think this renaming is merely China's stating its own positions. Likewise, India has stated its positions very clearly. Now, clearly, both sides wanted to de-escalate, and that's why the leaders on both sides don't want the territorial disputes to spiral out of control. So I think that there was a wish on both sides to de-escalate. However, of course, the commanders on the ground are not authorized, and of course they have to be seen to safeguard their own respective sovereign territories. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the long-term solution is actually some sort of a talk, a genuine talk, discussion, negotiations, as what happened just now between China and Bhutan. I mean, China and Bhutan over the past couple of days or even the past week is progressing quite constructively over their territorial disputes, because the China, as between China and Bhutan, there are differences as to their respective boundaries. So this negotiation has been going on quite constructively, and this is a very good lesson to take for both China and India. And of course, both countries would like to safeguard their own territorial claims on both sides. But I think the whole thing has got to be looked at properly in historic perspective.
So let me ask Secretary Sybil about that. We've had the King of Bhutan who's touring India right now. Just a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister there revealed that there were active negotiations with the Chinese on Doklam, as well as some of the other disputed sites between Bhutan and China, and they are moving fast towards some kind of a resolution. How worried should India be about that? Because Doklam was also a point which saw a flare-up back in 2017. India, of course, which is the de facto net security provider to Bhutan, was also dragged into that particular conflict. I think it lasted for about 70-odd days. But now, if Bhutan and the Chinese are moving towards resolving this border dispute without India being involved or without India's inputs, then how worried should India be about that?
Look, we have very good understanding with Bhutan at the highest level. We are kept informed about the status of negotiations. So we should not read too much into what the Bhutanese Prime Minister said to a very unimportant, unknown Belgian French newspaper. But leave that aside. The question to ask is that China, one of the biggest countries in the world, is claiming territory of one of the smallest countries in the world. On what grounds? But this is China's view of its sovereignty claims, which have no historical basis and no basis in law. But it is China flexing its muscles along its periphery and trying to secure as much vantage points on its periphery as possible to be able to be in what they think is in a secure position. They have also now claimed a sanctuary within Bhutan, which they can't have access to unless they go through Arunachal Pradesh. This is the extent to which they are browbeating this poor little country, which does not know what to do. Now, insofar as sovereignty claims over Bhutan are concerned, especially in the Doklam area, Bhutan is not wrong in saying that there is a dispute between Bhutan and China, but also India is deeply interested in this part of the territory because of very vital security considerations. And therefore, Bhutan and China cannot agree to the tri-junction unless India is involved. To that extent, what they're saying is not wrong. And I don't think that Bhutan can independently negotiate anything with China with regard to the territory in which we are interested. What they've been telling Bhutan is that we'll give up our claims on the north if you accept our claims in Doklam. This is the way they are pressuring Bhutan. And added to that, as I said, is they started claiming this sanctuary within Bhutan. These are pressure tactics.
All right.
The same mindset applies to their disputes with India. Now, our friend just said about China's sovereignty claims in Arunachal Pradesh. Can he actually give any instance historic where the Hans set foot in Arunachal Pradesh. All their claims are based on their occupation of Tibet and their sovereignty over Tibet.
I'm completely out of time on that note. We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you very much to Kawal Sibal and to Andrew Leung for joining us because we're shifting focus now here